The cattle queen dared him to train her wild stallion. 30 ranchers failed. The struggling cowboy won. Brash. The morning sun rose over the wide open plain, spilling golden light across the ranch lands. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of hay and wild grass. Birds chirped, and in the distance, a lone stallion galloped, mane flying a streak of wild power that seemed impossible to contain. It was this very horse that had become the talk of every rancher in the county. Psst. Known as the cattle queen's prized stallion, it had earned a reputation as unbreakable. 30 experienced ranchers had tried to tame it, and all had failed. Some returned with bruises, some with broken equipment, and some simply gave up, shaking their heads in disbelief at the horse's strength and fiery spirit. The cattle queen herself was a legend. She had earned her nickname not just because she owned the largest herd in the region, but because of the fearless way she ran her ranch. She rode every day, worked alongside her cowhands, and handled the wildest animals with confidence that few could match. Her presence alone commanded respect. People spoke of her in hushed tones, sharing stories of her courage and the exacting standards she held. Her ranch was a place of discipline, hard work, and high expectations. Only those who could prove themselves under her scrutiny were considered worthy of being called ranchers. And now, with her wild stallion refusing to be trained, she had decided to make a challenge, an open invitation for anyone brave enough to try. Across the valley, a small and weather-worn ranch struggled to survive. Here lived the cowboy who would become the unexpected hero of this story. He was a young man, lean and tanned from years of working under the sun. His hands bore the marks of hard labor, calloused from ropes, saddles, and the endless demands of caring for livestock. Life had not been easy for him. Droughts, fluctuating cattle prices, and a series of unlucky events had left his family's ranch on the brink of collapse. Yet he carried a quiet determination in his chest, an inner fire that refused to be extinguished by setbacks. He loved horses, not just as animals, but as partners, creatures capable of trust, intelligence, and emotion. He had a way of sensing their moods, understanding their fears, and earning their respect. People often said he had a special gift, though it had not yet been recognized beyond his small community. One day, word spread across the county that the cattle queen had issued her challenge. The announcement was simple but bold. Anyone who could successfully train her wild stallion would earn not only her respect but also a generous reward. The horse had broken 30 men before, but the queen's offer was tempting. For many, it was a dare. For some, it was an opportunity for fame. For others, it was sheer curiosity. Every rancher whispered among themselves, calculating their chances, recalling the stories of bruises, of torn saddles, of shattered confidence. Most dismissed it as impossible. Some even laughed. But the cowboy, sitting at his kitchen table listening to the news over a scratched radio, felt something stir within him. A mixture of fear and hope. He thought of his family, of the land that had been in his family for generations, and of the horses that had always been part of his life. He knew the risk. One wrong move could injure him severely. The stallion was no ordinary horse. It was a storm, unpredictable and untamed, with eyes that seemed to measure a person's courage and intentions. But the cowboy also saw a chance. If he could succeed, not only could he earn the reward, but he could prove to himself and others that patience, understanding, and heart could triumph over raw strength. He had faced hardships before, and he had learned that giving up was never an option. This, he realized, could be his moment. The first time he approached the cattle queen's ranch, the sight of the wild stallion made his heart pound. The horse was massive, muscles rippling under a glossy black coat. Eyes bright and alert, nostrils flaring with tension. It pawed at the ground, tossing its head, and let out a loud whinny that echoed across the fields. Other ranchers had tried to get close, waving ropes, shouting commands, or attempting to use force. All had been met with defiance and danger. The cowboy, however, approached differently. He moved slowly, deliberately, showing no sudden gestures that might startle the horse. He didn't carry the whip or stick that most men relied on. Instead, he carried a bucket of oats, some water, and, most importantly, a sense of calm. He knew that the horse could sense fear and impatience, and he wanted to show only steadiness. At first, the stallion barely noticed him. It stomped, kicked up dirt, and circled its enclosure like a storm contained within four walls. The cowboy studied it from a distance, noting its behavior, its patterns, the way its ears flicked at sounds, the moments when its attention wavered. He spent hours observing, never forcing contact, learning the stallion's language, breath. He saw that the horse wasn't mean. It was afraid and mistrustful, a natural response to years of confinement and failed attempts to dominate it. The cowboy understood that the horse's wildness was a form of self-preservation. Every gesture, every flick of the tail was meaningful, and he committed himself to interpreting them carefully. Days passed, and the cowboy returned each morning and evening, patiently waiting for even the smallest signs of acceptance. At first, the horse would ignore him entirely or snort, shaking its mane as if to dismiss his presence. But slowly, small changes appeared. The stallion would glance at him with curiosity. Its ears pricked in cautious interest. It began to eat the oats he left at a safe distance, though it still kept one eye on him, alert and wary. These were tiny victories, almost invisible to an untrained eye, but to the cowboy they were monumental. He celebrated them quietly, understanding that trust could not be rushed, that every step forward mattered. The community watched skeptically. Some ranchers rode by laughing at the cowboy's attempts, whispering that he would fail like the others. They saw the stallion's size, its strength, and the countless failed attempts of those who came before. They underestimated him, assuming that no mere cowboy from a struggling ranch could succeed where professionals had been defeated. The cattle queen herself observed from a distance, her sharp eyes tracking the cowboy's progress. She said little, but the hint of curiosity in her gaze suggested she was intrigued by his different approach. Unlike others, he wasn't trying to force the horse. He was building a connection. As the days turned into a week, the stallion's behavior began to shift. It no longer pawed violently every time he entered the pen. It lifted its head, ears forward, and watched him approach with a level of attentiveness that was new. The cowboy spoke softly, letting the words drift on the breeze, as if inviting the horse to listen, not command. He worked slowly, offering food by hand, and never forcing the horse to do anything against its will. Patience was his weapon, understanding his shield. It was grueling work, exhausting in both body and spirit, but he felt a sense of purpose he had not felt in months. Every glance from the horse, every small step forward, was a signal that his efforts were not in vain. There were moments of fear, too. The stallion would rear suddenly, hooves striking the ground dangerously close, or spin in sudden panic, sending dust flying. The cowboy remained calm, stepping back just enough to give it space, never losing his nerve. He reminded himself that fear could not be met with anger. To succeed, he needed empathy, observation, and trust. Nights were spent thinking about strategies, reviewing the day's progress, and planning how to continue without provoking the stallion's defensive instincts. He knew that each failure could undo days of careful work, so he measured each movement with care, precision, and respect. By the end of the first part of his journey, the cowboy had reached a pivotal moment. The stallion, once untouchable and aggressive, had begun to acknowledge his presence without panic. It allowed him to approach closer, to leave food within reach, and even to make brief tentative contact with a hand on its muzzle. The community, once skeptical, began to take notice. The cattle queen, observing silently, seemed impressed by the cowboy's patience and the stallion's gradual acceptance of him. but she still doubted whether he could fully tame the horse. But there was no denying that he had achieved what others could not, a glimmer of connection with the wild spirit that had eluded 30 experienced ranchers. The cowboy returned home each evening exhausted, but filled with determination. He thought about his family, his ranch, and the dream of proving himself. The stallion was not just a horse. It was a symbol of everything he had worked for, every challenge he had faced, and every hardship he had endured. He understood that the coming days would be even more difficult. The real test had only begun. But he also knew something fundamental. He had made a start. He had taken the first step toward achieving the impossible, and with patience, courage, and heart, he might just succeed where so many had failed. The days grew longer as the cowboy returned to the Cattle Queen's ranch each morning, his boots crunching on the dry earth and the rising sun painting long shadows across the pasture. The wild stallion awaited him, eyes sharp and muscles coiled, a living symbol of defiance. Unlike the first few days, the horse now recognized him, but its trust was fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of breaking. Every step forward felt like walking on a tightrope. One wrong move could shatter the progress he had painstakingly built. The cowboy knew he had to be patient. He had learned quickly that rushing the stallion would only result in disaster. The other ranchers had failed because they tried to impose their will, their commands, or their fear onto the horse. They had used ropes, whips, loud shouts, and brute force, expecting the animal to bend to human control. The cowboy approached differently. He observed the stallion's patterns, its moods, and its reactions. He noticed how it pawed at the ground when nervous, how it shook its head when curious, and how it would snort when alarmed. Each signal mattered. To the cowboy, every gesture was a word, every movement a sentence. He was learning the language of the stallion, and slowly they began to understand each other. His first real attempt to get closer to the horse was cautious. He stepped into the pen carrying only a bucket of oats and a small brush. The stallion shifted its weight, tense and ready to flee, but it did not bolt. The cowboy knelt a short distance away, extending his hand slowly, and spoke softly, his voice low and steady. Psst. The stallion's ears twitched, nostrils flaring, but it didn't run. A small victory, yes, but a victory nonetheless. He spent hours like this, sitting quietly, allowing the horse to watch him, smell him, and gradually accept his presence. Each day he inched closer, never forcing contact, always letting the horse set the pace. Other ranchers scoffed when they saw him. Some rode by on horseback, shouting derisive comments. "You'll be lucky to leave that pen in one piece." One laughed, shaking his head. 30 tried, 30 failed. "You'll be number 31. But the cowboy paid them no mind. He knew the horse would sense any anger or frustration, and he could not afford that. He focused entirely on the stallion, ignoring the voices around him. For him, this was not a challenge for pride or money. It was a test of understanding, patience, and respect. Yet progress was not without setbacks. One afternoon, as he reached out to offer a handful of oats, the stallion suddenly reared. Its hooves struck the ground, sending dirt flying, and its eyes blazed with panic. The cowboy stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding being hit. He could have reacted with fear, frustration, or anger like so many before him, but he did not. He stood still, took a deep breath, and let the moment pass. The stallion calmed eventually, lowering its head and slowly returning to the ground. The cowboy offered the oats again, this time placing them a little further away. The horse ate cautiously, glancing at him occasionally. That day he learned an important lesson. Patience was not just a virtue, it was survival. Evenings were spent reflecting on the day's events. He would return to his small ranch tired and sore, yet determined. The thought of failure hovered at the back of his mind, but it never took hold. Instead, he focused on small victories. The way the stallion had allowed him into its space, the slight relaxation in its posture, the fleeting moments when it seemed curious rather than fearful. Each success was fragile, yes, but tangible. He noted every detail, every movement, as if recording a map of the stallion's behavior. Every night he asked himself how he could do better tomorrow, how he could build trust without forcing compliance. Slowly, a bond began to form. The stallion, once a tempest of uncontrollable energy, began to show signs of recognition. It would lift its head at his approach, watch him intently, and sometimes even nicker softly, a subtle greeting. The cowboy responded in kind, speaking in low tones, brushing the horse gently and moving with deliberate care. He discovered that the animal responded best to calm energy and consistent behavior. Any sudden movement or loud noise could undo hours of progress. This delicate balance required not just skill but intuition, a connection that went beyond commands and equipment. The cowboy also faced moments of fear. One afternoon, while attempting to lead the horse toward the paddock, it bolted unexpectedly, dragging the rope across the ground. He held on, using his body as leverage, and gradually guided it to a stop, sweat streaming down his face. His arms ached, his legs trembled, but he never let go. This moment was a turning point. The stallion had tested him, and he had endured. From that day forward, the horse's behavior showed subtle signs of deference. It still carried the fire of its wild spirit, but it began to recognize the cowboy not as a threat, but as a steady presence. The community began to take notice. Word spread that the young cowboy was making progress where others had failed. Ranchers who had once mocked him now whispered among themselves, curious to see how far he could go. Some even came to watch from a safe distance, astonished at the calm confidence he displayed. The cattle queen, observing silently from her veranda, seemed intrigued. She did not interfere, but her sharp eyes recorded every detail, noting the difference in approach. Unlike others, he did not demand obedience. He invited cooperation. Distinction fascinated her. She had seen many men try and fail, but none had approached the challenge with such patience and understanding. Breath. Days blended into weeks, and the cowboy's efforts became a rhythm. Morning light, careful observation, measured movements, gentle words, and constant attention. He learned the stallion's fears, the sudden movement of shadows, the noise of metal gates, the unpredictability of other animals. Each day he addressed one fear at a time, never overwhelming the horse, always moving at its pace. The stallion responded with gradual trust. It would allow him to stand near the fence, then reach over to touch it lightly, then follow a few steps on its own. Each small step built upon the last, creating a fragile yet undeniable bond. Despite progress, doubt still lingered. The cowboy knew the stallion could turn on him in an instant. Its power, agility, and intelligence made it a formidable opponent. Every training session carried the potential for disaster. Injuries were always a risk, relying on instinct, knowledge, and a quiet determination that refused to yield. He often thought of his family, of the ranch that depended on him, and of the opportunity to prove that understanding and patience could achieve what force could not. This motivation sustained him through fatigue, frustration, and fear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm hues across the pastures, the cowboy sat quietly near the stallion. The horse no longer pawed violently or snorted in alarm. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, nostrils twitching, ears pricked forward in cautious curiosity. The cowboy reached out, hand trembling slightly, and the stallion allowed a tentative touch on its muzzle. It was a small gesture, almost imperceptible, but it marked a monumental moment. Trust had begun to take root. He whispered softly, "Good boy," and the stallion's eyes softened, a glimmer of connection passing between them. This progress, however minor it seemed, changed everything. The cowboy realized that the real challenge was not physical. It was emotional and psychological. The stallion's wildness was a product of fear, past failures, and instinct. To succeed, he needed more than strength. He needed empathy, patience, and unwavering calm. And he had it. For the first time, he felt that the impossible might be possible. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, with setbacks and tests. But he also knew he had laid the foundation for success. By the end of Part 2, the cowboy had transformed the first tentative steps of trust into a working relationship. The stallion was still wild, still powerful, but had now recognized him as different from the others. He had proven to himself, the community, and the cattle queen that he was not just another rancher seeking glory. He was a man capable of understanding, patience, and perseverance, qualities that no brute force could replace. The journey was far from over, but the first true victories had been earned, and the stage was set for the next phase: deeper bonding, greater tests, and the breakthroughs that could change both the cowboy's life and the stallion's destiny forever. The cowboy woke early that morning, before the sun had even risen. The sky was still a soft gray, the kind of quiet that promised a day of possibilities. He filled his coffee cup and gazed across the plains, thinking of the stallion. Days of careful observation and gentle approaches had brought them this far, but he knew the hardest part was yet to come. The horse had begun to trust him in small ways, but trust was fragile. One wrong movement, one misstep, could undo weeks of patient work. First, still, he felt a sense of determination he had never known before. Today, he decided, he would try to move beyond mere recognition into something deeper: cooperation. When he arrived at the Cattle Queen's ranch, the stallion was already in the paddock, eyes alert, muscles tense, ready for whatever the day might bring. The horse had a presence that could intimidate even the bravest man. Yet the cowboy approached with calm, steady steps, his voice low and even, his eyes meeting the stallion's in a silent greeting. He carried nothing but a brush and a small bag of oats. No ropes, no whips, no loud commands, just patience, understanding, and a willingness to move at the horse's pace. The first part of the day was familiar. Observation. He watched the horse's movements, its reactions to the wind, to the distant calls of other animals, to the shifting shadows of the fence posts. Each signal was a piece of a puzzle he was determined to solve. He noted how the stallion's ears flicked at certain sounds, how its weight shifted when it became nervous, and how its eyes softened slightly when he spoke in a gentle tone. Every subtle sign mattered. The cowboy understood that progress was not measured in grand gestures, but in these tiny moments of connection. By mid-morning, he decided to attempt the first real step toward cooperation. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand with a handful of oats, placing it on the ground within reach but not too close. The stallion lifted its head, nostrils flaring, eyes sharp. It pawed at the ground nervously but did not bolt. The cowboy stayed still, watching, breathing steadily, letting the horse make the first move. After a tense moment, the stallion inched forward, sniffing the oats, then looked at the cowboy. Their eyes met, and in that instant there was a flicker of understanding, as if the horse recognized that this man was different from the others who had tried and failed. Encouraged, the cowboy took another small step. He approached slowly, brushing the stallion gently along the neck. The horse stiffened at first, then relaxed slightly, allowing the touch to continue. It was a breakthrough, small but monumental. The cowboy smiled quietly, feeling a surge of hope. He knew the process was far from over. The stallion's trust could still be broken in an instant, but this was the moment he had been working toward. the first real physical connection, the first sign that the horse was beginning to accept him. Over the next few hours, he worked on establishing a routine. Desk man Stown walking alongside the stallion, letting it set the pace, never forcing movement, always maintaining a calm presence. The horse was still cautious, testing him at every opportunity. It would suddenly pull back, shake its head, or snort loudly. But the cowboy never reacted with anger or fear. Instead, he stayed calm, moving slowly, speaking softly, and offering reassurance through gentle touches and steady gestures. The horse began to respond, sometimes nudging his hand, sometimes following his lead, with small steps. Progress was gradual, measured, and deeply satisfying. As the day wore on, the cattle queen observed from a distance. She had seen many men attempt what the cowboy was doing, but none had approached the challenge with such patience and understanding. She noted the difference immediately. He wasn't trying to dominate the horse. He was earning its respect. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture thoughtful. Even the way he breathed, the way he shifted his weight, spoke of calm authority without intimidation. The queen's curiosity grew. She had been skeptical at first, but now she wondered, could he really succeed where 30 others had failed? By afternoon, the cowboy decided it was time for the next step, leading the stallion out of the pen. This was a critical test. In the past, even experienced ranchers had been dragged, thrown, or refused outright. The cowboy knew he had to act with precision and patience. He approached the horse slowly, holding a lead rope loosely, letting it see the movement without feeling pressure. The stallion tensed, nostrils flaring, but did not bolt. With quiet words and steady hands, he guided it a few steps toward the gate. The horse resisted initially, but he remained calm, never pulling, never forcing, simply encouraging. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to move with him. This small victory marked a turning point. For the first time, the stallion was responding to him willingly. It still had moments of resistance, sudden movements, and flashes of its wild energy, but it no longer treated him as an enemy. The cowboy had established a fragile yet undeniable bond. He continued this careful training, repeating the process, gradually increasing the distance and complexity of movements. With each success, his confidence grew, and the horse's trust deepened. The community continued to watch with a mix of skepticism and awe. Word of the cowboy's progress spread quickly. Ranchers who had dismissed him now whispered with surprise and admiration. "He's doing what no one else could," one said quietly. Others shook their heads, unable to believe it, yet they could not deny the results. The cattle queen herself took note, impressed by the cowboy's combination of skill, patience, and empathy. But strength and force, none of which had worked. But instead she saw calm determination, understanding, and respect. This was different. This was something new. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the cowboy sat beside the stallion in the paddock. The horse stood quietly, head lowered, nostrils twitching, ears relaxed. He brushed its mane gently, whispering softly. For the first time, the stallion leaned into his touch, a subtle gesture of trust that spoke volumes. It was a small act, but it represented a monumental breakthrough. The cowboy felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a connection that went beyond words. Breath. He understood the horse, and in that understanding a bond had formed. The breakthrough was not just physical. It was emotional. The cowboy realized that the stallion's wildness was not defiance. It was fear and survival instinct. By approaching with patience, empathy, and consistency, he had reached the horse on a level that no one else had. The lessons were clear. Trust cannot be demanded. Fear cannot be ignored, and strength is nothing without understanding. The cowboy had proven that connection was more powerful than force, and that true leadership came from respect, not domination. The following days were a continuation of this delicate dance. Each morning brought new challenges. The stallion would test him in subtle ways, shifting suddenly, tossing its head, or moving unpredictably. The cowboy met each test with calm resolve, careful observation, and gentle guidance, bound in the last, creating a foundation of trust and cooperation that could not be broken easily. The process was slow, meticulous, and exhausting, but it was also deeply rewarding. He could see the transformation in the stallion. The fire remained, but it was tempered with recognition, understanding, and a willingness to follow his lead. As the weeks passed, the bond between the cowboy and the stallion grew stronger. The horse allowed him to ride briefly, responding to gentle cues, following directions, and trusting him completely. It was a dramatic change from the wild, unyielding animal that had terrified 30 ranchers before him. The cowboy had not only tamed the horse, but he had earned its respect and loyalty. The cattle queen, watching from her veranda, finally acknowledged his achievement. She had doubted, as everyone did, but she could not deny the truth. He had accomplished the impossible. The community, once skeptical, now celebrated his progress. People came from neighboring ranches to witness the cowboy and the stallion. They watched in awe as he moved with the horse, guiding it through exercises that only weeks ago would have seemed impossible. Children clapped, neighbors cheered quietly, and even rival ranchers admitted his skill. The story of his success began to spread beyond the valley, a tale of patience, courage, and determination that inspired everyone who heard it. By the end of Part 3, the cowboy had reached a level of understanding with the stallion that many thought could never exist. He had achieved the first true breakthrough. The horse no longer viewed him as a threat but as a partner. The bond was strong, mutual, and unbreakable. The road ahead still held challenges, more training, greater tests, and the ultimate demonstration of skill, but the foundation had been laid. The cowboy had proven that patience, empathy, and quiet determination could achieve what force, fear, and frustration could not. The stallion, once a symbol of untamable wildness, had become a reflection of the cowboy himself, strong, resilient, and capable of greatness. And for the first time, the cowboy felt a deep sense of hope, not just for the challenge at hand, but for his future, his family, and the life he had been striving to build. He knew the final tests were coming, but for now he allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. Sitting beside the horse as the sun disappeared behind the hills, the world painted in golden light and endless possibility. The morning air was fresh, carrying the scent of dew-covered grass and the distant warmth of sunlight, beginning to touch the horizon. The cowboy stood at the edge of the paddock, looking at the stallion that had once been untamable, a creature of pure power and defiance. Now, after weeks of patient work, the horse stood calmly, muscles rippling, nostrils flaring slightly but with a quiet attentiveness. Its eyes, once fierce and wary, now held a glimmer of trust, the kind that spoke of a bond built on respect and understanding. The cowboy took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anticipation and pride. Today he would test the ultimate step, riding the stallion through the open fields, proving not just control, but partnership. He approached slowly, his movements deliberate, allowing the stallion to see him clearly. The horse lifted its head, ears forward, nostrils flaring, but it did not shy away. The cowboy gently touched its mane, whispering softly, calming his own heart as much as the horse's. He could feel the energy still contained within the stallion, that untamed force, but now it was tempered with recognition and trust. Carefully, he swung a leg over its back, settling into the saddle with a grace that came from days of practice, observation, and patience. The stallion shifted slightly, but remained still, accepting him fully for the first time. The first steps were cautious. The horse moved slowly, testing the balance, gauging the cowboy's weight and intentions. He guided it with soft pressure of his legs and gentle rein movements, never forcing, never shouting. With each step, the horse's confidence grew, and so did his. They moved across the paddock, then toward the wide-open fields, where the plains stretched endlessly, golden with morning light. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the culmination of weeks of dedication, effort, and unyielding perseverance. The cattle queen had gathered a small crowd for the demonstration. Ranchers, neighbors, and local townsfolk stood at a safe distance, curiosity shining in their eyes. They had seen him work tirelessly, had watched his patience, and had heard whispers of his progress. But now they would witness the final proof. Some were skeptical, recalling the tales of 30 ranchers who had failed before him. Others were quietly rooting for him, hoping that this underdog, this struggling cowboy, could do what seemed impossible. The air buzzed with anticipation, a mix of doubt, hope, and excitement. The cowboy guided the stallion through gentle circles, transitions from walk to trot and back again, each movement smooth and controlled. The horse responded flawlessly, matching his cues with precision and grace. The crowd murmured, impressed by the calm authority and the evident bond between man and animal. The cowboy continued, testing the stallion's limits without overstepping, encouraging it to move faster, turn more sharply, and respond to subtle commands. Each success was met with quiet satisfaction from the cowboy and growing awe from the observers. At one point, the stallion tested him, spooked at the sudden flutter of a bird nearby, tossing its head and bolting a few steps. The cowboy stayed balanced, applying gentle pressure and soft words, guiding it back without force. The horse paused, calmed, and returned to his side, accepting his leadership with a trust that had been earned, not demanded. The crowd held its breath, watching the delicate interaction, recognizing the depth of understanding that had been achieved. It was more than skill. It was empathy, patience, and connection. As the demonstration continued, the cattle queen stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the cowboy and the stallion. She had been a silent observer throughout, intrigued by his approach but cautious in her judgment. Now she saw the proof. The horse, once deemed unbreakable, moving confidently under the guidance of this man, responding willingly and displaying a bond that went beyond the ordinary. A smile appeared on her face, rare and genuine, as she called out to the cowboy, "You've done what no one else could." "You've earned my respect." The crowd erupted in applause, some cheering, others simply shaking their heads in amazement. The cowboy felt a surge of pride and relief. Months of hard work, struggle, and determination had led to this moment. He had proven not only to the community but to himself that patience, understanding, and perseverance could overcome even the toughest challenges. The stallion, now calm and attentive, nickered softly as if acknowledging the achievement. It was a moment of triumph shared between man and horse, a testament to the power of trust and mutual respect. After the demonstration, the cowboy dismounted, patting the stallion gently. The horse responded with a soft nuzzle, a gesture of affection and acknowledgement. The cattle queen approached, extending her hand, which he shook firmly. "You have shown true skill," she said, "not just in riding, but in understanding. That is what sets you apart." Her praise was significant, carrying the weight of her reputation and the respect of the entire community. The cowboy felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had not only succeeded in the challenge but had done so in a way that honored the spirit of the horse. The community continued to celebrate his achievement. Ranchers who had once doubted him now offered congratulations, acknowledging his unique approach and determination. Neighbors and townsfolk shared the story, spreading word of the cowboy who had tamed the untamable stallion. Children watched in awe, inspired by the demonstration, and adults reflected on the lessons of patience, empathy, and persistence. The cowboy, usually quiet and reserved, found himself at the center of admiration, but he remained humble, attributing the success to understanding the horse rather than any personal glory. Over the following days, the cowboy continued to work with the stallion, strengthening the bond and refining their partnership. The horse, once feared and wild, became a symbol of the cowboy's dedication, skill, and respect for animals. It was no longer a challenge or a test. It was a partnership built on trust and mutual understanding. The cowboy felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had achieved something that few believed possible. The cattle queen, now fully convinced of his abilities, offered him more than praise. She invited him to work alongside her on the ranch, recognizing the value of his skill, patience, and character. For the cowboy, this was an opportunity not only to continue his work with horses, but to secure his family's future and the survival of his own ranch. The reward was significant, but the true reward was the recognition of his abilities and the respect he had earned from one of the most formidable figures in the region. In private moments, the cowboy reflected on the journey. He remembered the first day he had approached the stallion, the fear, the uncertainty, and the skepticism of others. He thought of the nights spent planning, the days of careful observation, and the countless small victories that had led to this triumph. Each step had required patience, empathy, and unwavering focus. He realized that the lesson extended beyond the challenge, that true success comes not from force or fear, but from understanding, perseverance, and respect for those you seek to guide. The stallion, now calm and attentive, became a companion as well as a partner. The cowboy rode through the plains, feeling the wind on his face, the power of the horse beneath him, and the satisfaction of a bond earned through trust. The horse responded to subtle cues, moved with grace and strength, and displayed a loyalty that could not be commanded, but only earned. Together they became a symbol of what could be achieved when patience and empathy were applied with skill and determination. The story of the cowboy and the stallion continued to inspire others in the community. Ranchers and neighbors who had once doubted the possibility of taming the horse now spoke of it with admiration. Children dreamed of one day achieving similar feats, and adults reflected on the lessons of patience, persistence, and understanding. The cowboy had not only succeeded in the challenge, but had set an example that resonated far beyond the boundaries of the ranch. As the sun set over the plains, casting long shadows and painting the sky with golden and orange hues, the cowboy sat quietly beside the stallion. He ran his hand along its mane, feeling the warmth and strength beneath his fingers. The horse nuzzled him softly, a gesture of trust and companionship. The journey had been long, difficult, and filled with moments of doubt and challenge, but the reward was more than he had ever imagined. It was a bond, a partnership, and a story that would be remembered for years to come. The cowboy knew that the challenge had tested not just his skill, but his character. It had required patience, courage, empathy, and determination. He had faced the impossible and emerged victorious, not through force, but through understanding. The community, the cattle queen, and even the stallion itself recognized the accomplishment. And for the cowboy, the true reward was knowing that he had stayed true to his values, respected the horse's spirit, and achieved success in a way that honored both man and animal. In the weeks that followed, the cowboy continued to work with the stallion, refining their skills together. The horse became a trusted partner in ranch work, helping with cattle, guiding other horses, and demonstrating the lessons of trust and patience that had been learned. The community continued to celebrate the achievement, and the cowboy found new opportunities to share his skills, earning respect and recognition in ways he had never dreamed possible. Ultimately, the story of the cowboy and the wild stallion became a tale of triumph, patience, and understanding. It was a story of a man who dared to try where others had failed, who faced fear and uncertainty with courage and empathy, and who built a bond that could not be broken by force or doubt. The cowboy had not only tamed the untamable, but he had shown that true strength comes from respect, trust, and perseverance. And in doing so, he transformed the lives of those around him, leaving a legacy of hope, courage, an inspiration that would endure long after the final ride across the plains.